welcome to today's installment of the Forum for a New Central. This is the third in the series. It's a monthly series that we've been having since September, and I'm delighted to bring the year to a close with this particular topic. We are going to dive very deep into all things related to mobility, transit, and infrastructure. And I'd love to tell you guys to join in again in January for our next installment on the 7th. But without further ado, I want to introduce our illustrious panel, starting with Paul Zimmerman. I can't think of anyone better suited to moderate this particular topic. So without further ado, Paul, I'd like you to introduce your panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Tiffany. Welcome everybody who's following this forum. It's an interesting discussion I've had wanted to have for a long time, and I'm glad to have that with Keith Griffiths, who is the chairman of ADAS and the founder of ADAS. Alok Jain, who is a managing director of Trans Consult, and he's also a fellow at Civic Exchange, and he knows everything about buses. And a good friend, Oren Tatcher, who is the founder of OTC and who's an architect specialized in mobility. So very simply, we'll start off immediately with Keith to dive into the topic for today.
Great. So let me get an image up here, and then we'll talk to that image to start with. All right. There we go. So this is, of course, the footbridge across Connaught Road. And we all know the nature of the traffic congestion in Central and of the roads around Central. And for sure, the Central Wanchai bypass has alleviated a lot of that traffic congestion, but we're still experiencing quite a lot on the roads in Central. And ERP may help that, and there's a study going on right now on ERP, but I would suggest that many of the vehicles that are in Central are well able to afford ERP and wouldn't be deterred by it. And on top of which, is a huge amount of car parking in Central that those cars are trying to access. Now, most commuters in Central use much vaunted Central Footbridge system, which is absolutely wonderful and a shining example to the rest of the world of how to connect up cities. And here's a map of that footbridge system. It encompasses the mid-levels escalators, the walkways around Hong Kong Land's property, the extension of those walkways into IFC, and then on into the Admiralty walkway system, and even the North Wanchai walkway system. And of course, the mid-levels escalator. From west of the mid-levels escalator, there is no longer a walkway system. Those walkway systems also link up to a subterranean system. In dark blue there, you will see the MTR subterranean connectivity. And that's particularly important for Central Station because it links up all the way over to AIA building, Chater Garden, all the way through to IFC, a very important linkage indeed. Now, what we see here dressed in pink is all the elevated public space in Central. These are all the rooftops, the parks, and public areas within buildings, be it Pacific Place or the Exhibition Centre, so on and so forth. And you can see that forms a massive connectivity of public space. And each of those public spaces are linked by the footbridge system across the impassable roads of Connaught Road and so on. There are missing links, and these aren't the monkeys that came along. These are the missing links in Central and in Admiralty. And what we have there is dotted in small dots are links that will be built imminently, such as Site 3 in Central. And in the larger dots with the arrows, those are links that are not anticipated to be built, but we should be looking at. And what these links do is take three significant footbridge systems and connect them together. So it takes the central footbridge system, connects it to the Admiralty footbridge system, and from the Admiralty footbridge system to the Wan Chai North Wan Chai system. Now, what do these footbridges do? What are we looking for? Now, I would suggest that actually, because Hong Kong has been developed along the coast, then what it is a series of villages connected north-south from the sea to the mountain and east-west by a series of linear routes. And so starting from the west there, we have what I call the King George V link. There is no footbridge system and the link is tenuous. There's another one called the Western Market link that leads us all the way up to Hollywood Road. And it could do with a few footbridges to link across some of the important roads. Then I have what I call the PMQ link that goes all the way from Costco up to PMQ and the museum. And then we have a very well established link created by the mid-levels escalator down from Daigun through Central Market to IFC, a very good traverse indeed. Then the Central link, which of course is well established with the Hong Kong Land Footbridge Network going up to Lang Kwai Fong. Civic link, which has been identified for a long time. The government link, which is linking through to Tamar, Queensway and Pacific Place. The arts link, which I hope will be a good link in the future through the APA and up to Star Street. And the exhibition link from the exhibition center through to the old Wan Chai Heritage District. And all of those linked by these three blue road links, Devoe, Chater, Gloucester. And these are the weak links. These are the ones that are really not succeeding in linking up the villages, if you like, that we need to have a good close look at how we can stitch this whole network together. So that's it, a brief introduction to the footbridge system, underground system of Central, and the village network.
Thanks, Keith. I think that's a great way of painting, setting out the frame of the picture that we're trying to fill in today. So I thank you for that context. Alok, you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that can be done, of course, as Keith said. Keith has shown very clearly there are missing linkages which can be developed as we redevelop parts of Central and also redesign some of the space there. But there are a number of measures that can be done immediately and that can improve Central quite significantly. And for example, few of those are one is your goods vehicle transport. And as you know, in the morning peak, currently about 20% of the traffic passing through Central is actually goods vehicles. And these vehicles can easily be moved out of the peak hour system of Central, and that could alleviate traffic to a large extent. The other area is parking. And Central is a shortage of parking in Central. I mean, if you look at the context of Hong Kong, there is only 1.1 parking space per private car. That basically means that nobody should be driving in this city. Yeah, but yet people drive. And in Central, roughly about 30% of the traffic is caused by people looking for parking spaces or people accessing the parking spaces. So if we can have a good parking management system combined with a very high degree of enforcement, that would also alleviate a lot of movement within Central area. I would like to put that in the context of public transport. And if you look at buses and how they pass through Central area, and although buses are more visible aspects of traffic in Central, but they carry the majority of the people in and out of Central area. Roughly 80% of the population that moves in and out from Central and Wan Chai, Central to Wan Chai spine is actually using public transport. So they are very essential part of the mobility in that area. And if you look at all this traffic that is building up, it actually slows the public transport down. The bus speeds over a period of last 10, 15 years have reduced by almost 20% in central and Wan Chai spine, which really impacts their carrying capacity. It impacts their delivery of services, and in the end, the attractiveness, the whole attractiveness to people. So I think we need to address a lot of these traffic aspects in central, which will improve some of these movement patterns. ERP, obviously, it has been on the card. I think the last report on ERP came out in January 2017, and which said that roughly more than 60% people in Hong Kong actually supported ERP. And as Paul, we have been dabbling with this word ERP since 1982. So it has been a very long time where we have done studies over studies and studies. And Keith mentioned another study that's going on, which I am not aware of. But if there's another study going on, I don't know what they're studying, honestly. But ERP is something with current framework of technology can be done all very easily. It doesn't require any intensive, those gantry kind of systems that Hong Kong was once looking for. If you see what Singapore is trying to do with ERP 3.0, this is going to be a completely device-based system where a device will be in every car and you will be charged based on the movement or amount of driving you do. So it's a pay as you drive kind of a system on ERP, which is the most equitable system. So those systems are now available and can be implemented fairly quickly in those areas. And Central and Wan Chai bypass is a case in question. Everybody thinks that it has really improved the traffic, but I think it's just shifted sands. Basically, it just moves traffic out now to the both end of the funnel, and it has not really, it has improved traffic in very localized pattern, but not from an overall perspective. I think it has created an impression, and there are much more number of cars which are now passing through Central and Wan Chai area. So a lot of these measures, which are soft measures, which are really can be done literally in a very short span of time and doesn't require major investment. I think that is something we should focus in on Central, and obviously combine that with more longer term measures of improving pedestrian linkages, improving connectivity between buildings. So those are would be my words for Central.
Thanks, Alok, for those recommendations regarding the soft measures on improving traffic and transport in our central area. Can I invite Oren to come in on his views to complete the picture here a bit? You're mute.
Oh, I'm muted. Yeah. Okay. Can you see my screen though? Can you? Yeah. Okay. So I want to actually, in a way, kind of go back to the topic that Keith was talking about, but maybe bring it down to earth, so to speak, and talking about the experience of walking in and around Central, and do a little bit of a historical survey, what I call a walk from Old Central to New Central. So it's important to kind of understand, I think, Central as essentially a bit of a schizophrenic environment when it gets to walking. So we have the Old Central, which is the old Hong Kong, late 19th century. The reclamation that completed Central to Connaught Road was already done by the beginning of the 20th century. And that situation actually remained in place for many years, for many decades, which is kind of remarkable because we think of the reclamation as sort of a process that went on non-stop, but actually for a long time, until actually the 1960s, the waterfront in Hong Kong was on Connaught Road, which was of course an active waterfront, not just ferries, but also obviously a lot of harbor activities before the harbor moved to the container port. So Connaught Road looked a lot like this. With a very active waterfront and a lot of both pedestrian and vehicular activity. But that's, of course, these are all kind of vintage pictures. So what's important, the point that I want to make is that the walking environment at that time was actually very traditional, very fluid in the mode of kind of traditional cities. You had a reasonably tight grid of east-west roads. and north-south roads, which were, of course, compromised. We know Hong Kong sidewalks today, and back in the day, I'm sure it was even worse in terms of activities that maybe hinder the easy movement of pedestrians, but the connections were there, and it was all on the ground. There were no elevated roads at the time. So this is where we find ourselves at the end of the 1950s. And what you see, again, is this kind of relatively tight grid of street level pedestrian network. And this is what we have today. And the schizophrenia I'm talking about is, of course, the fact that across Connaught Road, in all the new areas that were built since the 1960s, started with Sun Tak Center and developments also kind of the eastern around Tamar and so on. What we have is this. Now, Keith rightly celebrated this network as leading globally in terms of the connectivity that it offers, but it's very different. And that's the point I'm trying to make. So we kind of grafted a system that's a combination of elevated and underground walkways, connected podiums to a very traditional system of movement. And we all suffer, well, at least those of us who live and work in this area, kind of every time we try to transition between the two. And I would argue that what we have is I know it's not moving, yeah. We have a constrained but free zone, which is the old Central. Constrained, by that I mean narrow sidewalks, congested roads, and a lot of traffic, as Alok was saying. But on the other side, we have limited and prescribed system, which is, and it's important to understand the difference. It's prescribed in the sense that you can only walk where you are supposed to walk. There are not too many ways of connecting two dots. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. We all get used to it, but it's very, very different. And of course, the transition between the two happens across what I call the moat, which is Connaught Road. Connaught Road is really the moat that divides Old Hong Kong and New Hong Kong in a way that, including all the connections that you have across a moat typically, which is bridges and maybe tunnels and so on. So just I indulge myself in the quick exercise of what if. Oh, sorry, before I get to the what if, so how do you cross the moat again? So we have all those bridges, but importantly, and this is the point that Alok was making, we have, of course, the transportation nodes, which are the ferries, the PTIs, and the Hong Kong Station MTR, which are all ways that bring people directly into the heart of the moat, heart of the New Hong Kong, and from where they can circulate or connect to this new system of circulation. By the way, of course, it's a pattern we see all over Hong Kong, but in Central, it's adjacent to the old pattern. In that sense, again, it's a bit different. But these are the only ways to really penetrate this new area. So I did a quick exercise of what if, just kind of to say an alternative history of Central maybe would have given us something like this. Imagine the reclamation was planned as a piece of a city as opposed to big parcels to be built in increments by developers. Of course, that fantasy does not exist. But the thing that this would have given to us, the kind of views that you get, for example, down Pottinger Street. So imagine instead we might have gotten this, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we had even sight lines and visual connections to the waterfront through a grid that continued? And again, this is the way it was until the 1960s. There was always kind of those sight lines and views towards the waterfront. So anyway, the fantasy is just a fantasy, but I will close by saying, is there a way that street level connectivity cannot be completely ignored in the development of Site 3 and other future developments around the central area? Particular case in point is these two passages that are maintained under Site 3, the two roads. If you look at one of them is a direct connection of the road that cuts across IFC. Now, this one arguably just barely works as a street level connection. There's a bit of a sidewalk, at least on the north side, but the bridge is kind of on the light side, and you can say it works at street level. My concern is that the passage under Site 3 will look more like this, which is, of course, the connection, the road connection under the convention center, because it's very, very wide. And so you'll have opposite the Apple Store something that looks maybe something like this. And I guarantee you that that will push everybody to the podium level, where again, of course, it's a viable and you know, attractive proposition. But as I said earlier, it's prescribed and limited. The one thing I hope that maybe does remain doable is maybe doing something to cross the moat in a more street level fashion, maintaining sight lines between the City Hall complex and the, let's say, the Mandarin Oriental, which is, again, both of them have very nice street level footprint. So with that, thank you for your attention, and let's continue the conversation.
All right, great. This is fantastic. I think we have a setup here for the discussion. Let me just try to see how I can manipulate my my screen here. Let me just share, and to start off the discussion, I try to see if there's a few points that that have been made, and we try to get them together. We've been introduced, so I think Keith, you mentioned as well, the underground extensive, especially in Central, and this gets to the point that I think is made by you, Oren, where the street level environment is very much the green one, kind of south of the moat, and where we have these massive roads on the north side, and where we then have to live quite elevated. And there is this idea for the Vaux Road Central, whether we could improve walkability there and make that a east-west connection with much greater enhancements for pedestrians to move at the street level. So those are some of the ideas that are there. And then we have this ERP, which Alok, you mentioned that, and then that kind of overlaps these both these areas, both the constrained area and the free area, the area with massive through roads, and the areas where everybody is already walking at road level, which puts to me the question, which I would put to all of you, whether ERP should really cover the north, and whether ERP should just be for the area where we currently are at street level, whether that is the area where we should push the cars out, but not necessarily in the north, because we need that vehicle throughput, we've got the car parking, we need people to get in and out. So the delineation of where should we do ERP, where do we ask for people to walk at street, where do we have lots of traffic and transport coming through, which then adds to me a second question to you, Alok. Can I move the bus north, and can we move the loading and unloading north of the moat, and then get the people across to the south of the moat, out of those vehicles and the goods out of those vehicles? Is there a way of doing that? So not only, as you mentioned, reducing time or changing the time that goods are loaded and unloaded, but whereas during the day, people can get their goods across the moat, if there is a, what infrastructure are we going to need for that? And of course, then you can start thinking about that the ERP should stretch out on the south of the moat to left and right. That's a question on ERP. And then the elevated system and that network, and I've exaggerated here, and I think that Keith does a much better color variation and more specific than the students did on my side. But anyway, the emphasis, it's clear, we got this, when we north of the moat, there is a lot of that is elevated. And is that elevated network of all that blue, is that like a concourse in an MTR station where you find your way to go down to the right train? Is this then where you can go down to the right ferry, where you can go down to the right minibus, to the right bus, to the right train, and so on? Whether that concourse level here is where you can connect between all these different modes of transport, and this concourse level, this blue level, with all their shops and entertainment and restaurants, is where I can easily be directed to all these different modes of transport. So that's, again, a question which I pose to all three of you. And then can that concourse work better, and what other functions should that concourse have? And then again, I just put back to the ERP argument. If I put the ERP on it, again, if I get the cars out of here, out of the south of the moat, and I have everybody park, including the ladies in high heels, at the north of the road in a big parking, can I get them over the moat and do their shopping and walk about and enjoy south of the moat, but leaving the car north of the moat? So it's not just getting in and out of public transport, it's also getting in and out of their car parks. If that would be a line of thinking that we should develop in terms of the functionality of that elevated network, the concourse. And then if you start then think about the concourse, and this is very kind of illustrious, only it's nothing exact here, but if these are the points where you can get up to the elevated network or down to the elevated network, should they be increased a lot? And so we really think about where can you go up and where can you go down, and also where can you cross from the south to the north? I mean, those links that we currently have are very limited if we want to get a lot of people to be on the north in the constrained area where we have all the transport, and we want them and the vehicles out of the south of the moat area. So that basically how we think about that elevated network and what it does for Central to create that make that new Central work better. What are the improvements that we should be making to that elevated network and the Footbridge system that we have? So those are as a way of throwing questions to you. So Keith, you started off us today. You've now heard points made by the other three of us. How do you respond to this in terms of that function of that concourse?
Can we put up the central map again? So yeah, I think the Oren's point about the disassociation of the north part from the traditional south part is extremely correct. That the north of Connaught Road, north of the moat, are extremely large sites, and the traditional pattern of movement of streets now takes place within the large mall of IFC or on the roof deck of Exchange Square, and in the future will take place on the landscape roof deck, which is 10 meters above grade of Site 3. There's a huge landscape roof deck with all those dotted lines you'll see on this plan. So I think the ship has sailed on this whole notion of trying to extend a more traditional roof pattern, street pattern, into north of Connaught Road. And what we need to do is to make what we've got and what we're going to build in the future as efficient a public movement system as possible. And I think that is happening. For instance, what's happened at the Forum at Exchange Square, where that unused roof deck now is resplendent with Henry Moores and parks, water features, and people are using it as a park in the sky above the bus station. We need to do more of that. The roof on IFC is too far up in the sky, possibly for regular usage, but it could be examined how we could get alfresco dining up there without paying inordinate amounts of money to the government for that alfresco dining, and start to stitch that together as a usable roof deck together with what will be a very usable roof deck at Site 3. I think the two roads bisecting Site 3, I think, Oren, you're absolutely right. They're going to be tunnels. They're absolute nightmares. But I think once again, the ship has sailed. I mean, that site is lock, stock and barrel, planned, designed, ready to go out for bidding. And I don't think there's any way it's going to be changed. So there will be a continuation of those rather nasty above ground tunnels underneath the very usable 10-meter roof deck. and that will all connect all the way through to the ferries. Now, Paul, onto your point about, I like your point about using the massiveness of scale and the opportunities of the land north of Connaught to service the traditional city south of Connaught. I don't know how practical it is to have goods deliveries or goods delivery bays north of Connaught Road and then tunnels going under Connaught Road to service buildings in the traditional heart of Hong Kong. I think that would be inordinately difficult to do. However, I don't think it's difficult at all to build more connection and possibly even travelator connections from key node points north of Connaught Road, across Connaught Road by bridge and into the heart of Central, and encourage people through a mix of ERP and direct intervention that vehicles could not be on certain streets. Maybe certain streets would be closed down from 9 till 6. And therefore people would have to drop off north of Connaught Road and then perambulate through to the traditional core of the city. And I completely agree that's possible and would be a wonderful thing to achieve.
All right, so it looks like we need a real plan to support that. But just can we quickly go to Alok, moving the buses to the north of Connaught Road. If we can deliver that much improved connection with the south of Connaught Road, as Keith and Oren have alluded to, you think it's going to be possible? You're the bus man. Can we do it? Those are 77 bus routes.
So, Paul, it is already happening. If you see how many bus routes are actually on the north shore of that island or north of the moat compared to the south, I think it's already happened. So most of the buses are actually, because of and if you remember the picture from Oren, the PTIs, the big PTIs are actually on the north of the moat. So that is kind of happening organically, but yes, it can be planned in a better way. Coming to your concourse idea, I think it is indeed a great thing, the blue patch that you had connecting north and south, but it's a very poorly designed concourse, if you like. The wayfinding from a pedestrian perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done in the form of again, softer initiatives like wayfinding. It's not just about creating space. It's about letting people guide through that space from one end to the other. Today, if you go, and if you are in one of those blocks and you're trying to find your way through Alexandria House and Landmark and over to the North Shore, it is literally, you lose orientation. There is absolutely no idea. The signages are inconsistent. They don't follow a single standard, and it's just very confusing. So I think those investments need to be done in coordination with the property developers or whosoever is responsible for those signage, to make sure that those spaces are really functional and utilizable by the pedestrians. On the ERP, doing north or south only ERP, and I think the problem with that is if you do only the south part of ERP, then it is going to push more traffic towards the north and going to create another kind of problems. So we have to cordon off the whole sector there. But having said that, I would certainly say, let's do some ERP, whatever it is, rather than doing nothing and argue over what the exact boundaries should be. I think that initiative must be done to control some of the car traffic within the central area and push these vehicles outside into the parking lots that are in the periphery of those boundaries.
But I'm sure we can differentiate between the north and the south if we follow your smart ERP system. I mean, we don't have to be as resolute as whether it's in or out entirely.
Correct. Yes, you can. But the point is, we should do something, I think, and then see what impact it does to the traffic on the north side, and if necessary, extend it to the north. And I think that we need a little bit of a flexibility and resilience in that aspect. Other thing with this different level of pedestrian network that we have been seeing in different slides from Keith, Hugh, and Oren, is that we are forgetting one part, that many of these connections are not fully accessible. They are not of universal access quality. They create a lot of barriers for people to, with the accessibility needs to go up or down. So that is another, and if we have to maintain those accessible networks, and considering how aging population that we have in Hong Kong, we must take into account a lot of these nodes, which are, I would say, very brutal architecture, where these big staircases going up and down, and they don't provide any other form of alternative access between those vertical movements between different levels of pedestrian infrastructure. So
Thanks,
a
Alok.
number of those issues I think we have to address. But yes, a lot can be done. And as you said, there needs to be a proper planning for this area.
Which is actually one of the questions, if I can interrupt, coming in on our chat box. So maybe that Keith and Oren and Alok, you can have a look at the chat box, and we can then get back to this walkability planning. If I can pop over to Oren, getting a walkability plan for the area as a whole. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you do for airports and bus stations, and can we do this for Central as a whole?
Well, there are a couple of elements here. One is the wayfinding problem that I think Alok just mentioned might be a challenge with a concourse.
Alok, your microphone mute.
Oh, but you can hear me, yeah? So anyway, I think there's I mean, walkability is really about two things, right? It's the physical network that facilitates walkability, and that has inherent challenges. I mean, I was trying to be provocative with my what if, and I completely agree with Keith. That ship has sailed many decades ago. Unfortunately, I'm trying to suggest, are there strategic ways in which walkability could be improved locally and through maybe surgical interventions in what exists there? And there, I want to say, whether it's the ERP or something else. I mean, if there was a way we could, introduce more, points along the moat where you can cross from one side to the other, maybe even at street level. It does exist a bit further west. You have a few points in Shangwan and Saying Pun where you can actually cross Connaught Road. Maybe I was hoping, of course, after the central bypass opened, that there would be some opportunity to seize the moment and introduce grade crossings across Connaught Road. Of course, it didn't happen, and I'm not holding my breath. So that's one thing. And the dots, the missing links that Keith mentioned, I think that's also important to kind of identify what desire lines exist for walkability and try to fill them in, whether it's through elevated bridges, footbridges, or tunnels, or whatever it is that it takes to connect those dots. Of course, they need to be accessible and all those things that Alok mentioned. And then there's a wayfinding problem. And here, I think that there is still, I'm surprised that, we are still having, I mean, things have improved a little bit in terms of maps showing indoor passages and so on, but I think a lot more could be done. And it still is a reality that there are certain connections between, especially in the more kind of what I call the prescribed area, and between the two sides, that if you don't use them every day, or someone didn't show them to you, you may not know how to find them. And I think that that's something that's probably the lowest hanging fruit here, to create a wayfinding system that does give that information to everybody through their apps, through various navigation tools that exist today, and so on. And the last point I'll make on this, on walkability, is that, of course, there's a question of how that connects to public transport. And here again, I think, well, it's, if technology, if wayfinding was more seamlessly integrated with the systems that, or the apps that each one of the operators has, and that could be Nubus, of course, MTR, or KMB, and so on. I think there's that would go a long way towards improving people's combined use of transportation and walking to move between points.
So a walkability plan for the central area, and if I follow Sam Crispin's question here, what are the barriers to implementation to get that for central? because that's kind of like, if I take all the comments we've making, public transport and walkability plan for Central is what we really going to need to kind of overlay and try to improve the area overall and make good use for the opportunities that are there. How do we convince government and how do we get this going is Sam's question, and how can we all work on that together to kind of make this happen? Keith, how do we convince government? You're rubbing your eyes when I define
No. I think what we have to bear in mind here is that the footbridge system that's in place, apart from the mid-levels escalator itself and the government footbridges, was put in place by developers because they were incentivized to do it. When they redeveloped their buildings, if they dedicated a square foot of land at pavement level to the public, they got 5 square foot in the tower. If they dedicated 2 square foot of footbridge within the site boundary, they 1 square foot of footbridge within the site boundary, they got 2 square foot in the tower. So they were all the developers were incentivized to provide connection points to their buildings from other buildings. And there was a body within government that looked after this and encouraged footbridge connection. And that's why you have entertainment building connected across to Central building and avoiding that danger spot where people got killed in the past. That's how you've got footbridges reaching out to AIA building. And all those buildings have actually been built with future footbridges in mind. And the government does have a master plan of future footbridges as well as existing footbridges. Both of the government would build and that private developers are already bound to build because they've incorporated that gross floor area into their buildings as bonus. I would suggest very strongly that what we need to do is revert to that system, because it encouraged every developer to maximize the use of this building for the good of the public, which is what we're trying to make developers do. I mean, developers are actually motivated to make their buildings accessible and attractive to the public. That's how they make money. So if we can align the accessibility needs of the public with the developers' needs to make profit and provide good buildings by providing this incentivization method or re-providing it, then I think we'll see footbridges start again all over Central. Hong Kong Land has built, every one of its buildings now is accessible to the Hong Kong Land footbridge network. So it's very possible, certainly not impossible, to provide lifts and staircases at keynote points, and that's been done throughout the Hong Kong Land network. And it can be extended outwards to all the other buildings, either by the government incorporating accessibility lifts and staircases or by other developers doing it. It does need a coordinated plan. And you know what? We had one up until a few years ago. There was a wonderful department inside government that coordinated all of this throughout Hong Kong.
Who was that? Was it under the Development Bureau or the Transport Department?
I think it was BD, actually. I have to double check that, but we used to get our approvals in those days from BD for putting footbridges in and gaining extra GFL.
Okay, so the institutional arrangement on the side of government, we need that. We've seen improvements on that in energizing Kowloon East office, where there is an office under the Development Bureau that helps to resolve these issues in Kowloon Bay and Kwun Tong. And the question is whether with the sale of Site 3, that in combination with that, we need that kind of support to bring everything together, because Site 3 is a massive enhancement of that elevated deck, and whether that is an opportunity to bring, to kind of empower the rest of the district to connect with that, and that there is a concerted effort made by the Development Bureau with an energizing central or a new central or an office to help that. that I think could be a good idea if we take that up as a suggestion here. Then Elaine is asking in the chat box about modeling for pedestrians. Yes, Alok.
Yeah, can I just add one point to that? I
Sure.
think apart from these, of course, from a planning point of view, these footbridges are very important. But I think what we currently are doing, we are just drawing lines on the as a matter of these connectivity of footbridges. In Hong Kong, walking is not even recognized as a mode of transport. And I think what we have to do is have that recognition first and foremost, and that it is a mode of transport. And then when it is a mode of transport, we need to establish what are the origin destination patterns, what are the desired lines, how many people are walking through what kind of sections. There needs to be some sizing of these footbridges. I can name so many footbridges within the morning peak are literally unwalkable. There are just too many people on these footbridges. They're congested. So there has no, the people have not done any sizing or any studies. And I think Elaine has also made that point, that how we model pedestrian. So I think we need to start measuring these people, how we need to start monitoring how many people are walking from where to where and at different sections in Central, and then start to size those facilities. And when we do the footbridge planning in that area, we need to take this into account into capacity delivery of these footbridges and address them in the same manner that traditionally we have been addressing the traffic and transport infrastructure by building more roads and widening more roads and creating highways and whatnot. Okay, so I think that.
Well, I mean,
I hear we need a plan, and we need incentives, we need research and data. Oren, you do this kind of stuff in transport nodes.
Yes, well, I would say that the first thing we need, just to kind of complete what Alok was saying, is that until such time as there is sort of a proper department within government, whether it's TDO or whoever, that looks after the interests of pedestrians, a lot of it will, I mean, pedestrians will continue to be, to benefit from, whatever scraps highways department is willing to throw them, and whatever developers are incentivized to provide, which I agree with Keith, when they do it, well, Hong Kong Land is, of course, the best example, but it's unfortunately sort of an isolated example. I mean, there is no advocacy for pedestrians within the government, within the authorities, and that's really the problem. And we see it because, I mean, whatever happened to the walkability study? I haven't seen the results. In fact, I think things have gotten worse since the study was launched, because facts on the ground continue to be determined by authorities who are, remain focused on vehicular flows and so on. And yes, Alok, you're absolutely right. And Alain, I think, saying like, what about modeling of pedestrians? To the extent that there is modeling of pedestrians, it's rudimentary what I've seen. It's very basic, and it's mostly to do with it seems like. Well, you know what? I don't want to assign motives, but it's just insufficient. And I think, but that said, I don't think the primary problem of the elevated network in Hong Kong is capacity. Yes, there are bridges which are at the peak hour at capacity. I think probably the one in Wan Chai from the MTR to Immigration Tower is a prime suspect. But I think most of them are not so much by design, but they just end up being sufficient. I rarely see any of the bridges around Central at capacity or become uncomfortable. So I don't think it's, at the end of the day, sizing. Yes, I appreciate simulation, forecasts and so on are important, but I have my doubts how precise they can be. I think that we have rules of thumb. Paul, you said about what we do. So when we design a transportation facility and we don't have precise forecasts, or we don't know whether the corridor or the stair is going to be used by a peak minute of 100 or 150 or 75 people, we say what's the worst case scenario and size it for that. I mean, is it going to be a surge because a train just arrived or a bus just discharged all the passengers? We try to look at that and come up with some rules of thumb. I think the idea that we're going to have a comprehensive, precise model of pedestrian movement around Central, I mean, I wish there was, but I think it's aiming a bit too high. I think there are practical solutions that are much more low tech, but would still provide good guidance for whoever wants to be more.
Right.
It's more important to build them than to necessarily get too obsessed with sizing. That's my
Right, let's get the connections. I hear you. I know that I'm getting signals here that we're at the end of this presentation. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I think there's a consistent message here from all of us, but I'd like to end it on a positive note. I think that with these Site 3 development, I think there's a real impetus for all of us to go back to government and say, let's do an associated works and plan, an associated plan for getting the pedestrian movements in Central improved as a way of lifting up the entire experience for Central. So, and I think that would be a great opportunity to do that, and the government is going to get a whole lot of money for selling Site 3. So let's see if they can carve out some of that money to help this out. On that note, I'll thank all of you, Keith and Alok and Oren, and of course, Tiffany. Thank you very much, ULI, for this opportunity, and I'll hope to see you all soon in live mode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.